You know, when you open the hood of a standard gas-powered car, you basically expect to see what you've always seen.
Right, the usual machinery.
Yeah, exactly. Greasy metal, complex tubes, valves, just the familiar heavy architecture of an internal combustion engine.
Hmm.
But what you don't expect to see hiding in that machinery is, like, the front line of a geopolitical trade war, or, the secret blueprint for a global hydrogen energy revolution.
Well, we really have this tendency to view legacy auto parts as these static, boring commodities. I mean, the whole industry just assumes the internal combustion engine is a dinosaur, right?
Just waiting for the electric vehicle asteroid to hit.
Exactly. But the components under that hood are actually at the absolute center of one of the most aggressive, highly disciplined corporate survival dramas we're seeing in the global market right now.
Which brings us to today. Welcome to today's deep dive on the Japan Stock Podcast. I'm your host, and today our target is Aisan Industry, ticker 7283.
It's a fascinating one.
It really is. So our mission for you today is to unpack a really specific, urgent question. How does a legacy car parts maker, a company whose entire historical bread and butter is managing fluids and gases for gas-powered engines, fight for its life in an automotive future that is aggressively shifting toward EVs?
Right, because that shift is undeniable.
Right, so we are digging into their 2025 to 2030 midterm management plan and looking at their latest March 2026 fiscal year earnings forecasts to figure out, are they going extinct or are they evolving?
I mean, it is the ultimate adapt or die scenario. We are analyzing a company that is acutely aware of its own mortality.
Yeah.
They are executing this hyper-disciplined strategy to essentially bridge the gap between the engines of the past and the clean energy of the future.
Yeah.
And they're using their existing balance sheet as the bridge.
So on paper, if you just look up Aisan Industry, the blueprint is super straightforward. They manufacture fuel pumps, throttle bodies, and engine valves. Right. But when we look at the capital allocation in their most recent corporate roadmap, what is this company's true identity? Like, what are they really?
If we strip away the official corporate descriptions, Aisan's true identity is a massive cash-generating transition play.
Okay, break that down for me.
Structurally, they are squeezing every last possible drop of profit margin out of legacy internal combustion and hybrid vehicles. They are actively defending their margins in a declining market, specifically to fund a high-tech pivot into EV battery systems and hydrogen power.
So they're basically like a Blockbuster video store that saw the writing on the wall and, is using all their late fees to aggressively buy Netflix stock.
Yeah, that's actually the perfect way to look at their capital flow. They are using the cash cow of today to buy the infrastructure of tomorrow.
Wow.
But what requires real scrutiny here is how they forged the operational armor to actually execute this without bleeding cash. I mean, if you look at their recent financial history, you'll spot this massive 79 billion yen positive rebound on their balance sheet.
Wait, 79 billion yen?
Yes, 79 billion.
That's not a rounding error. How does a company bounce back with 79 billion yen? What was that from?
It was related to a reversal of previous quality costs. They took a catastrophic hit a few years back because of severe quality control issues.
Well, like recalls.
Exactly. In the auto parts industry, a failure in a microtolerance valve can lead to massive global recalls. The financial penalty was staggering. But, that financial scar forced a complete overhaul of their factory floors.
I had to fix the root cause.
Right. To ensure that kind of failure never happened again, they couldn't just, tell their human workers to be more careful. They had to hyper-optimize their production lines through automation, which led them to develop these ultra-efficient, multi-assembly collaborative robots.
Okay, let's define that because, a lot of factories have robots. What makes a collaborative robot the ultimate solution to a quality crisis?
Well, traditional industrial robots are just blind, heavy machinery. They operate behind massive steel safety cages because if a human gets in the way, the robot won't stop.
It'll just take your arm off.
Pretty much. And they run on fixed programming. So if a part is slightly misaligned on the belt, the traditional robot just jams it in anyway, which causes the exact quality defects Aisan was being penalized for.
Oh, I see.
But collaborative robots, or cobots, use advanced force feedback sensors and visual AI. They can actually sense resistance. If they touch a human, they instantly freeze.
Meaning human operators and robots can work shoulder to shoulder on the exact same assembly line.
Exactly. The robot handles the high-precision, high-repetition microassembly that humans mess up when they get tired, and the human handles the complex, adaptive tasks.
So they basically engineered their way out of a multi-billion yen crisis by building smarter, safer robotics for their own assembly lines, essentially eliminating the human error that caused the recalls in the first place.
Yes, and they optimized these cobots so effectively that a secondary business model actually emerged.
Wait, really?
Yeah. They realized other manufacturing companies were struggling with severe labor shortages and quality control. So Aisan is now packaging these collaborative robot systems and selling them as standalone manufacturing solutions to other companies.
That is incredible. A
Mhm.
high-margin revenue stream born directly from a past failure.
Right.
Talk about corporate resilience.
Absolutely.
But as an advocate for the retail investor listening right now, I want to move past the history and look at the hard numbers.
Let's do it.
We need to know how this strategy holds up today. Looking at their fiscal 2026 projections, their top line is shrinking. Based on the Q1 and Q2 data, along with their full-year forecasts, overall revenue is dipping by about 1.9% to roughly 330.8 billion yen. What's driving that contraction?
Well, we are seeing a combination of lower sales volumes for their existing gas engine products in specific geographic regions, and that's paired with severe currency headwinds.
Because of the yen.
Right. We have a stronger yen, which mechanically eats into the repatriated profits of a global exporter like Aisan. When they sell a part in the U.S., those dollars translate back into fewer yen.
That makes sense.
But if we map out the causal chain from their top-line operations down to their EPS, their earnings per share, the narrative completely flips.
Because top-line revenue just tells us how much money walked through the front door. We really care about how much they managed to keep.
Exactly. Let's examine the operating costs. Aisan faced a massive 23 billion yen drag over this period, purely from rising labor costs and raw material inflation.
Ouch.
Yeah. In a normal legacy manufacturing business, a shrinking top line combined with a 23 billion yen inflationary drag would absolutely crater their EPS.
But they didn't crater.
No, they fought back with a staggering 45 billion yen in internal profitability improvements.
Okay, let me make sure I'm hearing these numbers right. They lost 23 billion to wage hikes and inflation, but they somehow managed to squeeze 45 billion out of their own operations to offset it. Where on earth does 45 billion yen in efficiency come from?
It comes directly from that operational armor we were just talking about. They aggressively deployed those collaborative robots to reduce headcounts on the floor.
Ah, of course.
They optimized their material usage to drastically reduce scrap metal, and they completely re-engineered their logistics routes. They more than offset the inflationary drag through sheer operational discipline.
Wow.
Their operating profit only dipped by a fraction of a percent despite the 1.9% revenue drop and those massive labor cost spikes. They are fiercely defending their bottom line.
That level of margin defense is honestly impressive, but there's a glaring issue with their valuation that we need to address.
The PBR?
Right. Their price-to-book ratio, their PBR, is sitting in pretty distressed territory. It's been hovering between 0.84 and 0.98. For a company defending its margins this well, a sub 1.0 PBR is basically the stock market loudly declaring that it does not believe in Aisan's future growth.
They view them as a melting ice cube.
Exactly. So how does the midterm plan address this crisis of confidence?
Management is acutely aware that the market views them as obsolete. And their 2025 to 2030 midterm plan attacks that valuation aggressively through capital policy.
What are they doing?
They are implementing a highly connected global cash management system, or CMS, to fundamentally restructure how their capital flows.
Break down the mechanics of that CMS for us, because why does managing cash differently fix a depressed stock price?
Okay, think of Aisan's global footprint. They have subsidiaries operating in Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Historically, local subsidiaries just hoard cash in local bank accounts as a safety buffer against localized shocks.
Or currency fluctuations, right?
Exactly. So that cash just sits idle, earning minimal interest. A centralized CMS acts almost like a regenerative braking system in a hybrid car. It captures all that idle, wasted capital from a subsidiary in, say, Thailand or Mexico and sweeps it into a central corporate pool daily.
Oh, I see. So by pooling the liquidity, they stop their own capital from just sitting stagnant.
Exactly. The asset turnover radically improves. If the parent company in Japan needs to fund a massive share buyback program or invest in R&D, they don't have to go to a bank and borrow money at high interest rates.
They just use their own money.
Right. The excess liquidity swept from their own global subsidiaries, and they are using that freed up liquidity right now to aggressively buy back shares.
Which reduces the overall share count and automatically boosts EPS.
Exactly, while simultaneously guaranteeing a dividend payout ratio of at least 30%.
And the ultimate end goal of all this financial engineering.
Their stated mandate is to drive their return on equity up to 12% and their return on invested capital to 9.5% by 2027. They are pulling every financial lever available to force that PBR above 1.0.
By proving they can allocate capital more efficiently than the market expects.
Precisely.
Okay, I follow the capital strategy, but I'm going to challenge the underlying business model here. I'm looking at their own midterm plan, and they explicitly project that 28% of the global automotive market will be entirely engineless EVs by 2030.
That's right.
So they are a company whose primary intellectual property is pumping fuel and managing engine valves. Aren't they fundamentally fighting gravity? I mean, why should an investor care about a company fighting for a piece of a shrinking pie?
That is the dominant surface-level critique of any legacy auto supplier right now. But we have to apply the 80-20 rule here. We cannot get so distracted by the 28% EV adoption rate that we completely ignore the inverse of that statistic.
Which is?
72% of the global market in 2030 will still have an internal combustion engine under the hood.
72%. I mean, 72% of a global automotive market still represents tens of millions of vehicles rolling off the assembly line every single year.
Yes. And these are not the inefficient gas guzzlers of the past. The 72% includes hybrids and plug-in hybrids, which are highly complex systems that still absolutely require Aisan's fluid and gas management parts.
That's a huge market.
It is. And this is where Aisan's peer rivalry dynamics become really fascinating. While their direct competitors are panicking, blindly pivoting 100% of their R&D budgets to pure EVs, and bleeding cash in an oversaturated market, Aisan is expanding its economic moat.
In a highly profitable 72% market that their rivals are basically abandoning prematurely.
Exactly.
Okay, let's define that moat. If the combustion engine itself is changing to meet modern carbon regulations, how does an old-school fuel pump manufacturer stay relevant?
Well, their moat is built on advanced fluid dynamics and specialized materials engineering. They aren't just stamping out basic metal pumps anymore. They're evolving into a comprehensive engine systems supplier.
Meaning they do the whole package.
Right. Car manufacturers are facing incredibly strict carbon mandates, forcing them to engineer engines that can run on alternative fuels, things like biofuels, e-fuels, and E100, which is 100% ethanol.
Right, I want to focus on the mechanics of E100. Why can't a car manufacturer just use the fuel pumps they've been using for the last 20 years for an ethanol engine?
Because the chemistry of the fuel fundamentally changes the hardware requirements. Pure ethanol is highly corrosive to standard plastics and metals, and it vaporizes at completely different temperatures than petroleum.
So it would just destroy the old parts.
Yeah, if you put E100 through a standard fuel pump, the system will literally dissolve from the inside out, and the engine timing will be completely thrown off by inconsistent fuel pressure.
Wow.
But Aisan holds the proprietary intellectual property in corrosion-resistant polymers and specialized pressure sensors required to handle E100 safely and efficiently.
Which means if a global OEM wants to build a hybrid that runs on pure ethanol to meet some new government mandate, they don't waste billions trying to engineer a new fuel management system from scratch.
Nope. They call Aisan.
Because Aisan already has the patents and the production lines ready.
Exactly. Aisan becomes the indispensable integrated partner for the automakers during this really long, messy transition period over the next decade.
Okay, that makes perfect sense when we look at the engineering. But cars are a global business, and right now the geopolitical map is, well, incredibly messy.
To say the least.
We need to look at how this highly disciplined margin defense strategy holds up when it hits the reality of international borders. So let's shift our focus to China, because the data shows severe sales volume drops for Aisan's existing products there.
That's true.
I mean, domestic EV makers like BYD are dominating the market.
Yeah.
From the outside, it looks like a total bloodbath for foreign legacy parts makers.
And it is a bloodbath if a foreign supplier tries to compete on volume and price against a state-subsidized Chinese pure EV maker. But Aisan's strategy in China is completely divorced from that fight.
What are they doing instead?
It's about calculated resilience. They have recognized a critical reality on the ground. Outside of the ultra-developed megacities in China, charging infrastructure is sparse.
Right.
So for millions of Chinese consumers living out in the provinces, Plug-in hybrids, PHEVs, are really the only realistic, anxiety-free choice for long-distance travel.
So they are willingly conceding the pure EV market in the major cities and heavily targeting the massive, lingering PHEV market in the broader provinces.
Yes, they are actively restructuring their Chinese manufacturing footprint based on that exact reality. They know their overall revenue in China will decline as pure EVs take market share.
But they're okay with that.
Because their strategic goal isn't to stop the revenue drop. Their goal is to ensure that when the revenue drops, the profit margins don't collapse with it.
How do you do that?
They are deliberately resizing their local factories. They're scaling down the massive legacy assembly lines and replacing them with highly flexible, automated cells. These cells can remain profitable even at significantly lower production volumes.
It's like being on a treadmill that is slowly ramping down. They aren't trying to sprint to increase their distance. They're just adjusting their stride perfectly so they don't waste an ounce of energy while the machine slows down.
Exactly. The mechanical efficiency allows them to extract maximum profit from a shrinking sector. But, if China requires managed resilience, the United States market right now requires intense risk mitigation.
Yeah, let's get into the Americas because this is where the geopolitical reality really bites into the balance sheet. What is the headwind hitting Aisan in the U.S.?
Well, we need to look at a stark, preemptive warning built right into the absolute latest FY 2026 data. Management explicitly cites an increase in various expenses, including U.S. tariffs, as a direct, quantifiable cause of their operating profit decline in the Americas.
So we are seeing the direct impact of shifting U.S. trade protectionism.
Absolutely. The macroeconomic shifts toward protectionism are directly squeezing Aisan's profit margins. I mean, they operate a really complex cross-border supply chain.
Right, parts coming from everywhere.
Yeah, when they import raw materials and subcomponents from Asia into their North American or Mexican assembly plants, those goods are suddenly hit by escalating border taxes.
And that just eats the margin.
Couple that tariff burden with heavily elevated labor union demands and logistics costs in the U.S., and their North American margins are under intense structural pressure.
And it's not just the direct financial cost of the tariffs either. There is this sort of indirect shadow effect happening with technology restrictions that actually bottlenecks their manufacturing.
You are hitting on a massive vulnerability for global supply chains there. The U.S. has placed severe high-tech export restrictions on China, particularly regarding advanced semiconductors.
But Aisan isn't a semiconductor company.
They aren't, but their modern fluid management systems, especially those handling complex hybrid engines or alternative fuels, require advanced microchips and precision sensors to operate.
Because modern car parts are basically just computers attached to valves now.
Exactly. So when the U.S. bottlenecks the flow of technology to and from China, it creates unpredictable supply chain friction for a global operator like Aisan.
Meaning they could have a factory ready to go, but
They might have a fully automated factory ready to assemble 1,000 throttle bodies, but they suddenly find the line halted because they cannot source a tiny specific electronic controller.
wow.
And the controller isn't delayed because of poor planning. It's caught up in a superpower trade dispute. It makes forecasting their quarterly output incredibly difficult.
This paints a really challenging picture. I mean, if the U.S. is actively squeezing their margins with tariffs and tech bottlenecks, and the Chinese domestic market is buying fewer internal combustion cars, where's the growth catalyst?
They definitely need one.
A company can't survive purely on managed decline and share buybacks. They need a market that is actively expanding.
Well, to offset the friction in the U.S. and China, Aisan is placing a massive capital bet on India and the broader ASEAN region. And the FY 2026 data shows this bet is actually paying off.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they are aggressively completing major expansions of their manufacturing facilities in India and Indonesia right now.
Why India specifically? Is it purely a demographic play? Like the middle class is expanding and buying their first vehicles?
The demographic volume is the foundation, sure, but the true catalyst is regulation. India is aggressively rolling out much stricter environmental regulations, specifically the far-out Stage 6 emissions standards.
Okay, hold on. You're throwing engineering and regulatory terms at me. What is FROT Stage 6, and what does it actually mean for the physical hardware of a car?
Good question. Under older Indian regulations, automakers could sell vehicles with very basic, cheap exhaust systems. Now, the internal combustion process generates extreme heat, right?
Right.
And at those high temperatures, nitrogen and oxygen in the air bond together to create nitrogen oxides, or NOx, which is a highly toxic smog.
Okay.
FROT Stage 6 legally mandates a massive reduction in NOx emissions. To achieve this, automakers can't just tweak the engine software. They have to install advanced physical hardware, specifically EGR valves and carbon canisters.
Let's break those down. What is an EGR valve actually doing inside the engine to stop smog?
EGR stands for exhaust gas recirculation. The valve takes a precise amount of the inert exhaust gas that just fired and routes it back into the engine's intake cylinders.
And that does what?
Because this exhaust gas has no oxygen left in it, it dilutes the oxygen mixture in the cylinder. This slows down the combustion just enough to lower the peak temperature inside the engine. By keeping the temperature below the threshold where nitrogen and oxygen bond, the valve physically prevents the toxic NOx from forming in the first place.
That is brilliant. And the carbon canisters.
Well, gasoline vaporizes easily. Even when a car is parked, fuel fumes expand in the gas tank and try to leak into the atmosphere, which contributes to greenhouse gases.
Right, you can sometimes smell it on older cars.
Exactly. A carbon canister is packed with activated charcoal. It captures and traps those fuel vapors before they escape the vehicle, and then when the engine starts running again, the system purges those trapped vapors directly into the engine to be burned as fuel.
So essentially, overnight, the Indian government made it illegal to build a car without these highly sophisticated temperature and vapor management systems.
And automakers in emerging markets cannot engineer and patent these systems from scratch fast enough to meet the government deadlines, but Aisan holds decades of patents and the global manufacturing scale for these exact high-tech parts.
Oh, wow.
So regulatory tightening in emerging markets acts as a massive enforced growth catalyst. The OEMs are legally required to buy what Aisan sells.
Pulling all these global threads together for you, the listener. If the U.S. market represents a margin headwind due to protectionism and China represents a managed, highly efficient decline, then India and Southeast Asia serve as the aggressive shock absorbers for Aisan's global earnings per share.
Yes, the regional diversification provides fundamental stability. When one geographic region falters due to geopolitical friction, another region surges due to local regulatory mandates. They are successfully managing their decline in obsolete technologies while heavily funding their localized growth.
We started today by looking at Aisan Industry, a legacy company that, on the surface, looked like a dinosaur. But what we've uncovered is a highly disciplined survivor.
A very smart survivor.
Absolutely. They are taking the massive cash flow generated by their dominance in the 72% ICE and hybrid market, using their cash management system to sweep that liquidity globally, aggressively buying back stock to fix their PBR valuation, and dodging tariffs by finding regulatory gold mines in emerging markets.
They are executing the transition flawlessly. But before we wrap up, there is one final, incredibly forward-looking data point buried deep in the source materials, and it completely changes the narrative of what Aisan will be a decade from now.
Hit me. What is the secret project?
Hidden deep in the timeline of the 2025 to 2030 midterm plan, Aisan states that by April 2025, they are officially starting mass production of a new suite of components.
Okay.
But these parts have absolutely nothing to do with cars. They are components designed specifically to extract hydrogen gas from liquid ammonia for clean power generation grids.
Wait, extracting hydrogen from ammonia. That is heavy energy infrastructure, not auto parts. What is the physics behind that leap?
Think about it. Hydrogen is the holy grail of clean energy, but it's a tiny molecule that leaks easily and requires extreme expensive pressure to transport.
Right.
Ammonia, which is a molecule made of one nitrogen atom and 3 hydrogen atoms, is easily liquefied and transported at near room temperature.
Oh, interesting.
So the challenge of the global hydrogen economy is figuring out how to safely transport liquid ammonia and then crack it at the destination, breaking those atomic bonds to extract the pure hydrogen fuel.
And how do you crack it?
Cracking requires intense heat and flawlessly precise high-pressure gas and fluid flow management.
Which is exactly what Aisan has spent the last 70 years mastering inside internal combustion engines.
Exactly. They are taking their legacy intellectual property in fluid dynamics, high heat tolerance, and vapor management from automotive gas tanks and directly applying it to clean energy power grids. They are projecting 4 billion yen in annual sales from this specific ammonia cracking segment almost immediately upon launch.
That is just, it brings us right back to our original question. When you look under the hood of this company, you aren't just looking at legacy car parts. You have to ask yourself, what if this supposedly boring auto parts maker doesn't just survive the messy transition to electric vehicles.
Right. What if they actually leverage their hidden engineering tech to become a critical, irreplaceable infrastructure player in the global hydrogen economy?
Exactly. It forces an investor to completely reevaluate how they price this stock today. The market currently prices Aisan as a declining auto supplier, but the underlying operational data suggests they are actively transforming into an advanced energy transition company.
And that is exactly why we read the midterm plans and map the causal chains.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for tuning into this deep dive on the Japan Stock Podcast. Keep questioning the surface narratives, look for the operational armor built from past scars, and try looking at these legacy companies through a new lens. You might just find the future hiding in plain sight.